Everybody loves Dolly Parton. She's the rhinestone-covered grandmother of American music, the woman who turns every interview into a group hug, the billionaire who still talks like she's sitting on her mama's porch in the Smoky Mountains. But underneath 60 years of rhinestones and one-liners, there's a working musician who has been underestimated, undercut, and outright disrespected by people in her own industry. And unlike most of her image, that part of the story rarely makes the highlight reel. Because here's the thing about Dolly. She doesn't do public feuds. She doesn't do Twitter wars or tabloid mudslinging. So when tension actually happened, it happened quietly, in contracts, in recording booths, in green rooms, and it stayed there for decades. Today we're pulling those stories out of the shadows. Not rumors, not tabloid fan fiction. The real, documented friction behind 5 of the most complicated relationships of Dolly Parton's career. To understand why these conflicts cut so deep, you have to understand what Dolly was fighting for in the first place. She was born in 1946 in a one-room cabin in Sevier County, Tennessee, the 4th of 12 children in a family that had almost nothing. Music wasn't a luxury in that house. It was one of the only things that was free. She sang in church. She sang on the porch, and by the time she was a preteen, she was already appearing on local television and radio in Knoxville. The day after she graduated high school in 1964, she got on a bus to Nashville with a suitcase and basically nothing else. What most people don't realize is that Dolly didn't arrive in Nashville as a novelty act or a pretty face who got lucky. She arrived as a songwriter first, and that distinction matters enormously to everything that follows. She wanted ownership of her own material and her own image at a time when the Nashville machine was built almost entirely around men making decisions for female singers. That single fact, Dolly's refusal to give up control of her own work, is the common thread running through nearly every conflict on this list. The first and arguably most painful relationship on this list is with Porter Wagoner, the man who gave Dolly her big break, and then very nearly tried to take her whole career hostage on the way out. By the mid-1960s, Porter Wagoner already had one of the most successful syndicated country shows on American television. When his longtime female vocalist Norma Jean left the show in 1967, Wagoner hired the 21-year-old Dolly Parton to replace her. It did not go well at first. Wagoner's audience adored Norma Jean, and plenty of viewers made their displeasure with the swap very clear. But Wagoner stuck with his new hire, and within a couple of years, the pairing turned into one of the most successful duet acts in country music, racking up hit singles and drawing huge ratings. The professional chemistry, though, masked a power struggle that got worse every year. Wagoner didn't just want a singing partner. By most accounts, he wanted a protege he could fully control, someone whose business decisions, wardrobe, songs, and public image all ran through him. For a few years, Dolly went along with it, partly out of gratitude and partly because she understood exactly how much leverage he held. But she was writing songs the arrangement had no room for, and she was increasingly frustrated by a ceiling she hadn't agreed to. She has said in interviews that Wagoner struggled to see her as anything other than his employee, even once she had become a star in her own right on his own stage. She finally left the show in 1974. And for a while it looked like a clean, amicable split. It wasn't. 5 years later, in 1979, Wagoner sued Dolly for millions of dollars, arguing she still owed him money tied to their old management arrangement and the years they'd spent performing together. For a woman who has spent her whole career avoiding conflict, a courtroom battle with a man who launched her was about as painful as it got. She ultimately settled the case privately rather than let it drag through the press. And in later interviews she described just how tangled and emotional those years had become, admitting that Wagoner simply would not let go of the arrangement even after it had clearly run its course for her. What makes this story remarkable is the ending. Time did what lawsuits couldn't. By the late 1980s, the two had reconciled, and in 2002 Dolly personally inducted Porter Wagoner into the Country Music Hall of Fame, praising the role he'd played in her career. When he was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2007, she visited him, and after he passed away, she held a tribute concert in his honor at Dollywood. It's a rare example in Dolly's history of a genuine falling out that resolved into real forgiveness, but it took nearly 30 years to get there. If Porter Wagoner represents the mentor who wouldn't let go, Linda Ronstadt represents something almost the opposite. Two enormously talented, enormously stubborn women who simply worked in incompatible ways. Dolly Parton, Linda Ronstadt, and Emmylou Harris had wanted to record together for years before it actually happened. All three were towering figures in country and folk rock, and all three admired each other's work. But scheduling conflicts and record label politics kept delaying the project, and it wasn't until 1987 that their collaborative album, Trio, was finally released. It was an enormous success. Platinum sales, a Grammy win, universal critical acclaim. The sessions that produced it were a different story. Dolly has always worked fast. By her own account, she likes to nail a vocal in 1 or 2 takes and move on. Linda Ronstadt is famously the opposite, a meticulous perfectionist who would spend hours chasing the exact vocal tone she wanted, while Emmylou Harris tried to keep the peace between two very different working philosophies. Dolly has spoken candidly about how maddening she found the pace of those sessions, describing the experience of waiting around while Ronstadt fine-tuned a single line as genuinely frustrating. The friction didn't dissipate. A second album, Trio 2, was recorded in 1994 but got tangled in label disputes and didn't see release until 1999, by which point the working relationship between the two women had cooled considerably. Ronstadt, for her part, was reportedly candid in interviews about her own frustrations, describing Dolly as difficult to pin down and suggesting that Dolly's attention was often split between the group project and her booming solo career. It wasn't the kind of explosive, headline-grabbing feud that ends careers, but it was a real and lasting professional strain between two women whose voices, ironically, blended together as beautifully as any duo in country music history. This one isn't really a feud in the traditional sense. Nobody screamed, nobody sued anybody, but it's one of the most consequential standoffs in Dolly Parton's career, and it involves arguably the single biggest star in the history of American music. In 1973, Dolly wrote, "I Will Always Love You" as a farewell to Porter Wagoner while she stepped away from their partnership to pursue her solo career. It became a hit for her almost immediately. A few years later, Elvis Presley's camp came calling. Presley wanted to record it, and by most accounts he genuinely loved the song. For a songwriter still establishing herself in Nashville, having Elvis Presley interested in your material was about as validating as it got. Then came the catch. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had a long-standing reputation for demanding a significant cut of publishing rights on any song Presley recorded. In this case, reportedly around half the song's future royalties. For most songwriters at that stage of their career, that would have been an offer you simply couldn't refuse. Dolly refused it anyway. She has said in later interviews that giving up a piece of what she considered the most important copyright in her publishing catalog wasn't something she was willing to do, no matter whose name was attached to the request. By her own account, the fallout stung. She has said she believed Elvis was genuinely disappointed and that some tension lingered between them afterward, even though nothing ugly ever played out publicly. It's worth remembering just how unusual her decision was for the era. A young female songwriter turning down Elvis Presley over a publishing dispute was almost unheard of. But the decision paid off in a way nobody could have predicted. Nearly 2 decades later, Whitney Houston's cover of the same song became one of the best-selling singles in music history, and the royalties made Dolly extraordinarily wealthy. She has said many times that she never regretted saying no, even to the king himself. Not every name on this list is a fellow singer. But this next conflict is one of the ugliest, most public moments of tension in Dolly's entire career, and it's impossible to leave out. In 2008, staff on Howard Stern's radio show edited real audio clips from Dolly's own audiobook, recordings of her actual voice, into a fabricated segment designed to sound like Dolly making crude, offensive remarks about other musicians and about her own body. It aired as comedy. Dolly, who almost never speaks publicly about anger, released an unusually raw statement describing herself as shocked, hurt, and humiliated, and said the words attributed to her were things she would never in a million years have said. She went as far as suggesting she might pursue legal action, which for someone with Dolly's famously conflict-averse public persona was a striking departure from form. Stone's team didn't back down or apologize. They characterized it as satire and suggested the backlash was overblown. Dolly, true to her nature, never escalated the public fight herself. She made her feelings known once, and then let it go. The two didn't cross paths again for 15 years, until Dolly unexpectedly appeared on Stone's show in 2023 while promoting her rock album. The interview was polite on the surface, with Stone praising her career, but longtime fans and observers noted an unmistakable awkwardness in the room, a reminder that some things get smoothed over publicly long before they are actually resolved privately. The last one isn't a one-on-one feud at all. It's a moment when Dolly found herself on the front lines of an entire industry argument, and it says a lot about how seriously she took her own genre. In the mid-1970s, a wave of pop-oriented singers, most notably Olivia Newton-John, began winning major country music awards despite having little connection to Nashville's traditional country scene. For many veteran country artists, this felt like an existential threat. Pop crossover stars were taking recognition, radio play, and awards away from performers who had built the genre from the ground up. The tension came to a head when a group of established country artists formed the Association of Country Entertainers in 1974, partly in direct response to Newton-John's award wins. Dolly Parton was among the artists involved in that pushback. It wasn't personal animosity toward Newton-John herself so much as a broader fight over who got to define country, but it placed Dolly, ironically, in the position of defending genre borders at the exact moment in her own career when she was actively trying to break into mainstream pop and film. It's one of the more overlooked chapters in her history, mostly because it never turned into gossip column material, but it reveals a side of Dolly that rarely gets discussed. A woman who could be fiercely protective of an industry and a community that had given her everything, even while she was busy breaking every rule that industry had set for her. None of these 5 stories fit the tabloid version of a celebrity feud. There's no screaming match caught on camera, no decades-long blood vendetta, no supervillain arc. What they actually show is something more interesting. A woman who has spent 60 years being underestimated by the men who managed her, by the collaborators who couldn't match her pace, by the radio hosts who thought she was an easy target, and by an industry that occasionally didn't know what to do with someone who refused to stay in her lane. Every single time, Dolly's response was the same. She didn't bang the relationship down publicly. She protected her work, she said her piece once, and then she got back to writing the next song. That, more than any feud, might be the real secret to how she built an empire that's lasted this long. What do you think? Which of these stories surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the real history behind the rhinestones, subscribe for more.